area is very expensive, and how to deal with this this investment, and how to getting profit from this renewable energy.
Reza, can I ask you to explain your question a little bit more, because I'm not sure I completely understand what what you're asking here.
Government often invest in renewable energy or private partners. I mean, in Europe,
okay.
Because as far as I know, the cost of implementation in this area, in this energy, is very expensive. And how to deal with this problem in Europe?
Okay, so what you're saying is, in what way can somebody deal? Are you asking this in relation to the coursework, or as a broader question?
Broader question.
Okay. Now it makes more sense then. Okay, because I was thinking of it as part of the coursework, and that's why I got confused, I think. Okay, so right, it is true that many of the renewable energy sources are what we call capital intensive technologies. That would mean that you have significant part of the investment coming from the initial infrastructure installation. Yeah, so it is a little bit different than what you'd have, for example, when you're building, let's say, a coal-fired power station. Of course, you do have an initial investment, which is building the power station, but then you have lots of ongoing costs with maintaining the power station, with paying labor costs to keep the power station running, and with fuel costs to keep buying, fuel as you go on and you keep using the power station. If you were to install, say, a solar farm, then it is very unlikely you will have any serious maintenance costs because these are tiny. You have no moving parts. Nothing is going up and down there. Nothing needs lubrication or anything. The most you're going to need is possibly some costs for cleaning the solar panels every now and then, washing them a little bit to make sure that they're clean and they're not covered by dust or whatever else might be on them, and that you have a bit of maintenance again with maybe sometimes, I don't know, mice can eat cables and things like that if they're spread in a random field somewhere. So you might have such types of maintenance, but these are minor things. It's nothing very significant. And importantly, in terms of labor costs, you probably have zero. So probably you will have a couple of guards on site, maybe an electrician on site, but you will not need, a couple of hundred employees working on site and running the power station there, the solar power station. What you do have, however, quite a lot of is the initial investment costs, which could be quite significant. And it's the same when you're talking about wind energy or other types of renewable energies. So there is that element there which makes initial investments in renewable energy sources sometimes feeling as very expensive. If you take it as a whole life cycle analysis, economic analysis, most often renewables come out cheaper for most places. If you include in both the capital costs and the operational costs until the end of the lifespan of the investment. So in terms of what you said before, that often you have governments or private companies investing in these technologies, both things normally happen. You have packages where governments support private investment to get initial plans taking off the ground. We increasingly seen a smaller role for governments. As the time goes by, the governmental role is becoming more and more trivial. And in many projects now, in many large-scale projects now, the government is nowhere. So there is no governmental money. It's only private sector money. I want to talk to you a little bit more in one of the next classes about renewable energy project financing, and I think it's a very important issue because even the best ideas in the world, they're nothing. They're just ideas unless you find money to implement them. So I'm quite keen to, for us to have a more extensive conversation about what renewable energy financing actually looks like. From now, I can tell you very, very briefly that there are different pots of money that investors normally exploit. And there are different setups that can allow for these ventures to go ahead. But please keep in mind that for large scale projects in most of the European countries right now, we have already started seeing projects going on without any government money. It's only private money. So we're looking at subsidy-free renewables already. Yeah, does that make sense for now?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, okay, you're welcome. So any other burning issues? No, all good. Okay, so what I'll do then, I'll share my slides with you, and let me see if I do it like this. Oh dear, which one it is? Okay, no, this is the chart. Okay, can you see my slides now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it
Yes.
does.
Yes.
I seem to be using a different way to do it every time, and every time I'm wondering if it works. Okay, so thank you for confirming. Last time we looked extensively into this slide, and we discussed essentially the types of contracts that are happening in electricity trade. Today, I'll just very briefly go through that. The kind of the length type of contracts and the type of setups you have in these contracts. We won't stay too long on this one. It's just these are security features or security mechanisms that you have in markets. I would assume that those of you with economics or finance background or business background probably already know what futures contracts are and what options are, and and swaps and whatever. I mean, are some of you at least familiar with that? Maybe some of you have never heard of this before, but are you comfortable with these terms? Guys, you're stressing me out. Nobody has heard of futures and options and swaps?
Yes.
You have? Okay.
Me
Okay,
too, I
good.
did. Yes, I did too.
Okay, and are you coming from economics or business or something totally different?
Me from economics and business administration.
Okay.
Me too, business administration.
Okay, okay. That would be the standard background that you will be having finance classes. Okay.
We coming from industrial chemistry, so a bit far away.
What are you coming from? Say it again.
Industrial chemistry.
Oh, okay. Yes, that wouldn't have futures contracts in it. Okay. Let me then maybe I'll say a couple of words. Okay. So what we have here are what we call the derivatives in trading. They're not just for electricity trading. Pretty much every contract out there, every stock market option, will have a version of these derivatives. So it's not just for energy or just for carbon or anything. You can find them from pretty much every stock market traded commodity. So you have the futures, which are pretty much contracts that say, you purchase something today, a contract today, and the idea is that the delivery will be at a commonly agreed time in the future. So you have the 3 months futures, for example, which are typical contracts in which you buy a contract today at a price that is set today, and that contract obliges the person who agrees with you that they would deliver to you a certain amount of electricity or potatoes, for that matter. Yeah, it could be anything. By a certain time in 3 months exactly. There are 3 month futures, there are 6 weeks futures, there are sometimes a year futures, there are all sorts of lengths that you can find. Then there are the options. So the options are, it's a similar to futures. The main difference is, sorry, are you saying something? I didn't hear you. Hello? No, nothing. Okay. So the main difference between futures and options is that with options, the buyer is not obliged to take delivery of the agreed quantity of whatever has been agreed to be sold in 3 months' time, when the contract is to be materialized. So it just allows the buyer to have the option of taking in that delivery. So they might decide at the end of the last minute that, no, hang on a minute, I actually don't want it. Yeah. But if they do want it, it is there for them and they have paid for it. So it's a little bit of a different setup there. And then there are other derivatives with swaps. And again, there you're looking with specific pre-agreed prices or spot price of the time of the delivery and so on. Yeah. So these are all essentially the way I want you to understand them, because they might sound a bit nonsensical. Why would you even, purchase a contract now for a delivery in 3 months and then don't want the delivery even if you have paid for it, or anything like that? So the way I want you to understand these is these are essentially insurance tools. Exactly because in trading, we do not have a very good understanding, a solid understanding of where pricing is going to be in 3 months' time or in a year's time or whatever. I mean, we have lots of forecasting tools and we have lots of forecasting attempts and modeling and all of that, but we're still not sure what pricing is going to be in the future. We tend to have these insurance tools which allow us to have some other options than just the spot market and the day ahead pricing that we saw here. Yeah. So what that does is essentially, imagine, you're buying today 3 months ahead futures. That allows you that when that period starts coming closer, you will decide at that point, well, does it look like I might actually need that energy in the X time that I've booked it for? Or does it look like I have already built my portfolio and I have plenty of energy and I don't need to buy any more with these futures? If you don't need them, then you can dump them back in the market and you can have them being resold. Or you might decide that you can keep them and sell something else from your portfolio that is in excess of your needs. Or you can swap them for something else, or you can swap the pricing with the price of the future delivery time in relation to what you had agreed initially, and so on. So these are tools that allow you a degree of flexibility that might or might not, deliver you a better level of security and certainty over your pricing. So if your pricing ends up being very expensive at the time of delivery in the spot market, you have bought something earlier in advance and you can make a choice on whether to use it or not. That's what you would do, for example, on an options contract, or just sell it and make some cash out of selling it. So that's the way these are used. And what I can tell you is that in reality, such contracts very rarely result in material transactions. Yeah, the vast majority of these contracts, and because it's, the vast majority of trading happens on such contracts, to begin with. And what we find out is that in reality, most of these transactions on these contracts do not materialize in physical deliveries. Yeah, very rarely you have these contracts resulting in actual delivery of, gas, coal, or electricity, or potatoes, like I said before. Most often, they are purely insurance tools, which companies just trade endlessly. And then they either let expire or they use them, the day of the trade to swap with the spot price or whatever. So that is the nature of those. You might be seeing them. Those of you that have an interest in trade will see a lot more of these options. So they have, a very particular place in energy trade modeling that allow you to, optimize your position at any given time. I just wanted to make sure that you have heard of them, and that you're, when you see them somewhere, you're not wondering what the hell that is. Yeah. So that's for the derivatives. Have you got any questions to that point? No, all clear. So then I'll be moving us to the next slide. So here I have the names of some of the main stock markets for electricity. Now, what I want you to keep an eye on is that, I mean, how many stock markets would you be able to name out of the blue? Not for electricity, for normal stocks. Would you know of any stock market? Or a couple?
Like the, I don't know, New York Stock Exchange.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like that. Like the New York Stock Exchange, like the London Stock Exchange. Yeah, the Dow Jones. Yeah, you might have heard of some. Yeah, so there are stock markets. I mean, pretty much every country has a stock market. Some larger countries or US states have more than one. And there are, you know, the general stock markets, which are there to trade stocks of pretty much everything. Yeah, so it's not just, are you all seeing my slides, or are you seeing my chart, my Teams window?
I'm seeing your Teams window now.
My Teams window. So, okay, so you see what I see. Okay, I see how that works. Okay, so let me take you back to the slides then, because I want you to keep your eyes on these ones. So what we have there is generic stock markets that allow trading of every type of stock. So every floating company that is on the stock market can have its stocks traded in these stock markets. And normally companies, you know, will be charged for a degree of them being floated on that stock market. And the stock market itself can make money out of, you know, taxing a little bit, imposing a fee on the transactions as they go on. Now, besides the normal stock markets that we have in every country, we also have specialized stock markets for energy. Yeah, and some of those have in the past been specialized, you know, on certain types of energy. So, for example, we have some specific ones that look only on coal, others that look only on gas, others that look only on oil, and they have, you know, sometimes, you know, the defining prices that are there. So you hear, you know, benchmark prices for oil. You hear the Brent. Yeah, the Brent is a typical price for oil. That is a specific index that comes out of, you know, essentially what is the North European oil production, even though there's very little of it nowadays, but still that creates a specific pricing there. There's also the Texas oil, or you have the Texas pricing for gas at times at specific terminals, that is LNG terminals. You might be having the Japanese terminals for natural gas, again, another global index that allows, let's say, a kind of a global pricing for gas. And you also have electricity trades. Now, electricity tends to be a little bit different than the other energy resources in the sense that it doesn't travel so well. Yeah, so coal, gas, oil, we've seen previously that even gas that doesn't travel that well still travels a lot. Still, with LNG shipments, it can cross the world and go from one continent to the other. Oil a lot easier, and coal again fairly easy. You know, these resources can travel far and wide. When it comes to electricity, it's not the same. Electricity is a very different resource. You could, in theory, have cables going from one country to the other, and you do have that. You could also have cables going from one continent to another, in theory. But really, that's not necessarily a very easy thing to do, and you cannot transfer significant amounts of electricity in that way. So that means that you need a lot more what you'd call regional electricity exchanges. And these are essentially these exchanges that you see here, and they're not the only ones, clearly, but these are some of the most prolific electricity exchanges, which are spread. I mean, the specific ones I have here, they mostly deal with European trading. with different regions of Europe. That doesn't mean that any country is obliged to be participant in only one of these exchanges. There are countries that trade in various trades, in various exchanges here, and there are companies which are represented in these trades. Not just, it's not necessarily countries, it's just a company level system anyway. And you have a fair amount of current electricity trading going through these exchanges. You also have things like carbon allowances going through this through these exchanges, and other types of energy commodities. Usually, that would be regional gas prices can be found on these ones, and so on. So I have been keen, to show you a little bit of what these look like. So maybe what we can do is I can take you to the Apex Spot. So this is the one here, Apex Spot. I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor. What I'll go is I'll just go outside here of this window, and I'll check my if I go here, and I'll do that for you. So say, for example, I go to Apex Spot, yeah? European Power Exchange here, yeah? And I'll click here. And from here, I'll try to get you to market data. Can you all still see what I'm doing, in the browser?
Yes.
Yeah, you can. Okay, good. So I'll carry on with that. So for example, I can go here. Take it to market results. So you remember, that is the picture I was showing you in the first class, for example. And what I did say back then is that there is a good degree of depth in these systems. It's not, just one pricing. There's a number of different prices, and you can see here that you have the auctions, continuous pricing, capacity auction. Now you know what capacity auction is. It's not the energy that we trade. It's capacity auctions, which is what we were discussing the other day, which was that you can have companies winning contracts that oblige them to commit their availability to produce energy. It doesn't mean that they will be asked to produce energy. It's possible that nobody will ask them to produce anything, but still they have committed to have the potential to provide that energy when that is required, if that is required. So it's like a backup solution. So you have the auctions, the normal energy auctions, the capacity auctions, you have day-ahead systems, you have intraday, that is within the day, yeah? So I'm going to click here, and not all countries participate in every one of the segments. So when I go to intraday, for example, you see here, I'm stuck on the 60 minutes intervals, but it's only Switzerland that has that. If I click on 30 minutes, for example, it's also the UK and France that have that. If I click on 15 minutes, then it's a few more countries having it. Germany, it's the Netherlands, it's Belgium, and it is Austria as well that have that available. So we do have quite a few options here in the intraday market, for example. Other countries might be having more information if I go on the continuous trading rather than on the segmented one. And again, it's a different picture what you see with a 60 minutes interval, or if I go on the 30 minutes interval, or if I go on the 15 minutes interval. But it does fit a little bit with what I was telling you the other day, that you do have different types of requirements and different kinds of players can enter these markets depending on the intervals you're looking at. Yeah. So that is just, an opportunity for you to take a look on, what is going on in these markets. Now, if I click, what I've done here, I don't know if you saw it, I just clicked on Germany, and that gives me the whole table on how pricing has been unfolding in that particular market. Yeah, so you can see for every segment. So this is, for example, I'm showing you here from 12 o'clock at night to 12:30. That is broken into two different segments, like the first quarter and then the next 15 minutes. And you can see what the lows were, you can see what the highs were in that trading cycle. And you can see what was the weighted average, depending on the quantities that were ordered and the bids that were put in it, the volumes that were purchased here, and the volumes that were sold, and so on. Yeah, so it can give you a good level of detail. And if I keep scrolling, of course, you can see that this is happening. This is a clear data set that you get for every one of the trading segments of the day. Yeah. Now you might wonder, who cares? And that's a valid question. In the grand scheme of things, when you're designing policy, you might not care about these numbers. It is true. You might not care about the detailed numbers of what happened, say between 11:30 and 12 o'clock on the 29th of September 2021 in the German market. That's true. You might not care about that, but you do care about what kind of extreme pricings you might get. What does that mean for infrastructure requirements? So when you see, for example, gas pricing going crazy as it does in this late period, that immediately means that we're starting to make assessments for infrastructure requirements. So we start realizing, actually, it would have been nice to have some gas storage available. And we do have some gas storage around Europe. Some European countries have significant gas storage. We could be already saying we could avoid some of these peaks if our storage capacity was even larger in Europe. So similarly, you could be thinking that when you expect to have very low prices at certain times of the day, you could be incentivizing consumption at these times of the day. So it can even, at a grand scheme, when you try to create statistics with these figures and see what are the patterns that are emerging, you can use this for policy making. Okay? It's quite significant there. Some data here is available throughout. Some data is a little bit more restricted and you need to pay for it. I'm not encouraging you to pay for data in no way. The only thing I'm just showing you is that there are certain data sets available that are freely and easy to access for you if you want to, and if you think they can help you, not just for your coursework, but also more broadly, if you think that they can help you, with generally your understanding of the energy world. That is a recurring theme and a recurring advice I will be giving you throughout this module is don't try to treat everything as, instrumental for your coursework. Some things might or might not be relevant for your coursework, but don't worry about that. What matters, in my opinion, a lot more is that you develop an understanding and an appreciation of what is out there in terms of data sets, in terms of analysis, in terms of reporting and knowledge that you can tap into from freely available resources at any time later on during your careers. Because I'm pretty confident in saying that many of you will have careers in energy or some angle of energy and emissions or anything of that sort that will require you getting back to showing and demonstrating that you know about data, you know how to create robust analysis on anything like that. Yeah. So that's why I keep showing you these things, and you'll have a fair amount of that today. So that's a little bit of the epic spot. Any questions on that? Any question on electricity trade stuff? I'll go on the Nord Pool as well to see what part of that I can show you. So for example, I'm going on Nord Pool. That's another. Nord Pool is probably the largest energy market in Europe. Now I'm going to go directly to market data. And you see here, it opens up immediately on, on your data page. But there's also a map. Pretty similar stuff to what you saw before, yeah? So you can see straightforward, again, pricing per region, per segment of all the regions. Can go down and show you other parts of the map. There are certain data that you can download from historical market data. Last time I checked, most of that is behind a paywall. But some of that is freely available. It wouldn't necessarily go all the way back. But if you see what I mean, there are, hourly data that you could be looking at, yeah? And you can download them. So some of these are genuinely, free stuff. So if you're looking to do research in these areas, these are extremely valuable resources. And again, I want to point your interest to see the level of detail that there is out there. Yeah, so you have hydropower reservoir capacities. These are, you know, crazy types of detail that you can see here. So keep in mind, quite often there is more data than you can imagine that there is out there. So that's the second market I had in here for you. There are a few more. I don't think it's necessary for us to look at all of them today. I have the names here for you, and like I said, you know, the markets you see here, it's not all the markets. Pretty much every country has a small energy market, but some of them are more important than others. Yeah, so for me to show you, I don't know, the Greek energy exchange, that's kind of a minor energy exchange. You know, if you don't live in Greece, if you're not working in Greece, then I don't think you would really care. It's not a country that participates in lots of transactions or anything like that, or that is super internationalized in that sense. But then when you look, you know, the Nord Pool or Epic Spot, these are, you know, crazy coverage of so many regions, so many countries, so many important companies in these areas. So it's good to know these exist, have data available. Like I said, some data is sometimes behind paywalls, but there is a good amount of stuff that is freely available. Any questions about stock exchanges before I take you on to other things? No? Okay. Nothing too dramatic there. So let me carry on then and take you to next slide that is about the single energy market. Now, an issue that you might have started realizing here is that there is this concept across the European continent, and it's pretty much, of course, driven by the European Union. The aim is to try to harmonize the European electricity and gas markets. It's a very ambitious goal. It's not very easy. The way I want you to think about it is to see that the European Union has a sense of what we call the single market. I mean, I'm sure you have heard of that as a feature of the European Union. As somebody who lives in the UK, I can tell you that when the UK left the single market, you know, we're feeling it. You know, it's not a very pleasant thing. Lots of things have become much more difficult in terms of trade since we stupidly left the European Union's single market. So the single market of the European Union is essentially a market that allows, you know, certain freedoms of movement, movement of goods, of services, of capital, and means of production, which is labor. So you do have these freedoms in this market, but when it comes to the single energy market, that has been a little bit more challenging, particularly for the reasons I've outlined earlier on, that electricity in particular tends to be very regional. So you don't have easily electricity being traded, I don't know, from say, you know, from Sweden going to Greece. This is not a very straightforward transaction. And you don't have electricity being traded very easily, even from Sweden to the UK. Yeah, because even though the distance is a lot smaller, still you require a significant amount of cabling. And maybe you do not have enough of arbitrage opportunities that will allow for such transactions to be profitable. So really, what makes interconnections useful is the way we're costing risk. So the way we're costing the possibility of our country being left without enough energy. And then do we really see, you know, a value for having more connections with other countries abroad that we can potentially pull energy to our country from? Does that have a certain value? Does that value justify the expenditure for building large-scale cables for long distances? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But also, and more importantly, in market terms, if you're looking for purely market-based investments, then you're looking for things like, is there consistently enough an arbitrage opportunity? So when I was showing you before the Apex market, you remember we saw what was happening. I don't know, do I still have it open? Let me go and see. I was showing you what is happening, for example, in the markets of, let me see, is it here? Yeah, here it is. What was happening in the markets of Norway. And we were seeing that the Norwegian markets are up here in north. Right now, for example, sell energy for like 50 or 49.9 euros per megawatt hour. And, you know, on European standards, this is peanuts. Yeah, right now, by comparison to any one of the other prices you see live in the continent, this is peanuts. So, for example, you know, in the UK, the equivalent pricing is 162 pounds. So that's roughly something like 180, 190 euros. So if somebody had a cable powerful enough, long enough to connect Norway, central and northern Norway, with the UK, they could make quite a good amount of money, yeah, for letting energy flow from Norway to the UK. That could be a significant price differential to exploit and make significant profits. So that could justify a very expensive investment, which would be a very lengthy cable traveling from, you know, one area to the next. But we're now in a pricing crisis, if I'm to be honest. Yeah. So the prices you see in lots of the expensive prices you see in many of the European countries do exist only because we're in a gas crisis. So gas prices are ridiculously expensive, which means that lots of the electricity pricing for countries that rely a lot on gas to produce electricity can become ridiculously expensive. So, for example, the UK is one of these countries that needs a lot of gas to produce electricity. We use a lot of gas here. It's one of our main types of electricity production that we have. As a result, when gas is expensive, electricity in the UK can be very expensive. So it's circumstantial. Right now, electricity in the UK is very expensive. So that arbitrage with North Norway makes perfect sense. You know, you would love to have a cable here and make it work. Is this something to continue? When you put a cable down, you expect this to be an investment that's going to be quite long term. It has to be, you know, a 20, 30 years investment. Will this exist? Will this be an arbitrage opportunity that is going to stay around and will help us make money, you know, as an investor for a long amount of time or just a short amount of time? These are questions that investors are asking. But as I said before, it shouldn't be a question just about money making and just about, let's say, featuring business interests only. I think that is an area where governments gradually start understanding that they have to intervene and they have to play the role of, you know, market organizers and play the role of securing supplies for their respective areas. And that is where we see lots of the energy world subsidies going towards to. It's cables nowadays. It's not anymore subsidizing wind or solar energy. So that's a couple of comments, you know, in that area. Do you have any questions so far before I take you back to what the single energy market is? Okay, so back to the single energy market then. So what you have here is that the European Union is quite keen to create one market for energy across the EU. Like I said before, it's a very lofty goal. It's a super ambitious plan because it takes what? What is the main barrier to creating that?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. So I'm saying the European Union is very keen to create one market for electricity across the continent, across the European continent. And I'm asking you, what might be the barriers to achieving that?
Can we mentioned already the infrastructures?
Can you say it again? Sorry.
That we already talked about the lack of infrastructure that there is around the continent.
Correct. So it is lack of infrastructure. Okay, that is a very important one. Who said that?
Dania Sanchez.
Okay, hello. So lack of infrastructure, that is the primary problem, yeah? So unless you actually have the capability to transfer energy from anywhere to anywhere, to secure what you'd call in normal markets, to secure liquidity, then there is no, there's no market really. So that means that first port of call is infrastructure. So cables that can allow for significant amounts of energy to flow from anywhere to anywhere in Europe and exploit every arbitrage opportunity, not just the large ones that you saw now, for example, between the UK and, the UK is not even in the Union anymore, between the UK and Norway, not even Norway is, quite accidentally, I picked two countries there, neither of two are in the European Union. So that is one case that you have, extreme arbitrage opportunities, but there are other countries that have, smaller arbitrage opportunities. If you want to have one price, a single price of electricity for all the continent, that implies that you have perfect flows of electricity everywhere on the continent. That means an enormous amount of cables to achieve that. Yeah, it's not an easy goal. So that's the first thing that you require. The other thing,
Professor,
very importantly, is what?
can I ask a question?
Of course.
Okay, so you're saying that in order to have the same price around the European Union, the territory,
Yeah.
we would need infrastructure, but also wouldn't it depend on generation? Because
What do you mean? Say more.
Okay, so let's say if Italy generates, I don't know, huge amount of electricity,
Yeah.
it would still cost to transport that electricity per se to the northern countries. So in reality, it couldn't really be the same price, right? Or am I understand that?
It depends. So if you imagine it in a sense that take a step back and think that energy can flow, it's an imaginary world, yeah, that energy can flow from anywhere to anywhere. Let's imagine that this is possible. Then essentially what happens is that a common European authority is collecting bids for energy. So says, how much energy we need here, how much energy we need there.
Yeah.
And then on that knowledge, suppliers make their offers. They say we can provide energy for that price or for the other price, or that's how much energy we can provide for a particular time segment, and that's how much we need to be able to do that. So that will be the only kind of procedurally. It's going to be, of course, a complex process. It's not a small thing, but you do these things automatically. Probably you don't have an individual trader trying to run to run the show. But once you have that running, it is possible. Of course, you have supply. You have enough supply to do that. But even if you don't, the only thing that would mean is that prices will go up, as in any supply and demand system. Is this what you meant, or you meant something else?
Yes, this is what I meant.
Yeah. Quite often, ideally, what you want to achieve, what ideally a market does, a good market does, is providing, optimum efficiency. Yeah, this is what you want the market to do. I'm not saying it always achieves that. Yeah, don't get me wrong. We would be very happy if that was always doable. But ideally, that's the role of a market, to increase the efficiency of these transactions. Yeah. And by that, we mean that it increases, when we say efficiency, we mean that you increase the social benefit. So you make sure that in total, the whole community of consumers gets the best price they can get. So that is that, you allow, for example, Swedish consumers to access production from anywhere in the continent. So then they have the best possible chance to achieve the lowest price they can get for their energy. And similar, of course, for every country. So that is the target in a market like that. Like I said, I don't think it's, it's very easy. And in reality, in terms of the physical transactions, a lot of the energy that would be sold, close to Bologna, would be from power stations which are nearby Bologna. That's the truth. Because you have transaction losses, you have transaction costs that are involved into the process of transferring energy, I don't know, from Norway to Italy, that have to be taken into account. And maybe Norway, before it manages to reach with its energy Bologna, it has already spent that energy somewhere else, in other countries on the way. So the physical part, in reality, is covered by having one unified network. The way individual transactions work is more of a contractual thing. Yeah? So you might, an Italian retailer might have a contract with a Norwegian supplier. It doesn't mean that the energy that will flow from one place to the other, from all the way from Norway to Italy. It could be that in the process, contracts would change 4 or 5 hands, and eventually, the Italian retailer will be buying energy from somebody, in Venice, to sell it to Bologna. Yeah. But it will be a contract exchange as you go down the line. So yeah, there are a few ways to run that. What I would say to you is that in thinking how that can be achievable, the first thing, as you identified before, is infrastructure, and that is super important. We need more of that. We don't have enough of infrastructure to achieve that yet. And the second one is regulatory harmonization. So that means that we all have the same rules for producing energy, for synchronizing our energy grids, for having similar environmental requirements. So, say, for example, one country cannot produce energy just burning, polluting coal, where the other countries cannot burn coal, for example, if that was more cheap or whatever. So you do allow similar regulatory requirements. So countries can, suppliers from different countries can compete on different ground, on equal grounds, and benefit consumers in the best possible way. So the regulatory stuff is, I'd like to say it's actually easier to do because it's kind of cheaper. It doesn't involve hardware. It's not necessarily very easy because, of course, you have lots of legal requirements. You have lots of countries involved and different interests and different kinds of lobbying in every country that make things harder. So if you have any regulations that harm coal, countries like sometimes like Germany, countries like definitely Poland, definitely the Czech Republic, will not be very happy to see their coal, because it's one of their main resources, to see coal being harmed. Or equally, I don't know, if you had any regulations harming wind, I'm sure you would have immediately, Denmark freaking out, and so on and so on. So it's a balancing act in all of that. And I'm not sure that we will end up seeing, one market at any point, but it is the goal. It is something which the European Union is working towards to, and it is a good goal. One thing I will add, and I will move us on to the next slides, is that when it comes to infrastructure, keep in mind that a lot of the infrastructure that is required is anyways new infrastructure. Yeah, so in many ways we're looking for, imagine as we're building new renewable energy sources, and we're building a lot of new renewable energy sources because we need to grow renewables generally across the continent and across every part of the world. That immediately includes new cabling infrastructure. Yeah, it is part of the deal. Most often because where we're building, I don't know, enormous wind farms now, we didn't have energy projects before. So we need to connect them with cables to supply to demand centers. And because a lot of our new wind capacity is actually offshore, quite often we tend to connect it to more than one country. So it does appear now that, gradually as we're bridging the gap between say the UK and France and Belgium and the Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, that kind of area, the North Sea area, which is one of the places around the world that have some of the best offshore wind energy potential. So as we're ending up putting more and more wind there, the case is growing for more of these facilities to be linked to many of the countries that are in that region. So that's a development that is happening, because many of these wind farms, I don't know if you have ever, I don't know, have you seen any offshore wind farm? Has any of you seen an offshore wind farm, like in real life?
No, never.
No, because
In real life.
I mean, I don't mean to climb on a turbine. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that you saw it from the coast, for example.
Yeah, Professor, I saw it in Copenhagen.
Copenhagen, yeah. From there you can easily see it. Yeah, you can also see them quite easily from the UK. Lots of coastal areas in the UK. On a clear day, you can see the wind turbines, inside the sea. I mean, sometimes they're at a small distance, maybe 2, 3, 4 miles from the shore. So on a clear day, you can easily see them. Sometimes they're very far. Sometimes they can be, 40, 50 miles. So then you cannot see them. But also, sometimes there is this part of the sea. So that is, my area of the UK. If you can see where my mouse cursor is somewhere around here. Yeah, about where the price is. But where the dot of the price is, 162.00. So where I live in the UK is where the dot is, pretty much. That's Norwich. So quite often from there, from Norwich, we used to fly, I mean, when traveling was a thing, it's not anymore because of COVID. When traveling was a thing, we used to fly across to the Netherlands, which is here. Yeah, so Amsterdam is here. And you can take that flight, and it's normally something like 30 minutes, 35 minutes, something like that. It's a very small flight. It's so small that the airplanes don't really go all the way to high altitude. They fly at a relatively low altitude. That means that you can see pretty well what's happening down in the sea. Yeah? So in a clear day, you can see the sea level very well. And you see all of these, very large offshore wind farms. And you also, of course, see, older infrastructure with offshore oil rigs and offshore gas rigs as well. So this area is full of energy facilities of all sorts. And it's important to understand, that we have these large systems now being dotted around the ocean. It is doable, and gradually we will have more of those. This is only going to grow. So that's that with infrastructure and the requirements for a single energy market. Do you have any questions to those points that we just raised?
No.
All good. Okay, so then with that in mind, I'll take you to a couple more, angles of these issues. One thing is for us to think of, metrics of competition and competitiveness in these markets. And we will not spend too long here. It's just for us to get a feel of how these things might look like. So first thing to mention is this metric that, it's about how competitive an electricity market can potentially be. Because what we're saying here is that ideally you want to have, as broad a competition as possible. What that means is that you want to have many companies competing and hence benefiting consumers. So lowering the price, improving the service, making sure that consumers get the best possible deal. That's the idea. Now, in certain markets, that is not possible. Now, let's see a little bit here on this graph. What do I have here? I have the market share of the largest generator in the electricity market. That's 2019, but it's pretty much the same in 2020 in most countries. So what do you see here? Can you tell me a little bit what's happening here? Take a look at this graph. Let me know what you make out of it. Some of you might be very familiar with that notion of the market share of the largest supplier of anything. Those of you that are more familiar with competition economics, that's a standard metric we use there.
Well, it looks like in Cyprus we have a monopoly from the largest generator.
Correct. So Cyprus has an energy monopoly, that's true. What does that mean, energy monopoly? Can you explain it for everyone? Because not everyone will know what monopoly is other than the game.
Well, that it's just one big company that owns all the market share from that kind of market.
Correct, correct,
that,
exactly.
I don't know, in that country or in that whatever.
Yeah, yeah. So that is very easy to happen in countries that have a very small market. Yes, so if a country has a tiny market, like is the case in Cyprus, for example. Yes, Cyprus is an island, and even as an island, it's separated. You know, it has the Republic of Cyprus, and it also has the northern part, which is under Turkish occupation. So you do have that situation there where it's a very small market. It's a tiny market in its own right. It's essentially quite hard to see a profitable case for a second supplier to get in there. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's perfectly doable, but the incentive, it's not necessarily that straightforward as it would be in a large market. So that's one of the reasons. And the same, I would say, for Latvia and Croatia and Estonia. But then, oops, you see also France there. I mean, it's not a monopoly, obviously, but still, it's about 2/3 of the market in France are controlled by a single supplier, which is crazy because the French market is enormous, but it's still happening. So what is the case there? What's happening when you have a country like France having such a dominant supplier there?
Price will rise.
Sorry, say it again.
Price will rise. High
Okay.
price.
I'm not sure I understand. I'm sorry for that.
You said
Maybe
the
a high
prices
price.
are gonna rise.
Okay, now let's try again without all of you, with one person speaking at a time.
I'm Osmani from Bangladesh.
Okay, guys, write it. Can somebody type it? Because I'm really sorry, I just can't understand.
I think you say that prices will rise.
Prices would rise. What do you mean? So my question was, maybe my question wasn't clear, was why is this happening? Why do you have, in a large country like France, one supplier being in such an insanely dominant position? Because you see other similar sized countries, yeah, let me show you, Germany, it's very different, yeah, Spain, Italy, very different, below 25% for the larger players. And then France, 65%. What's going on?
This generator of in electricity market, where this company comes from?
So for France, for example, it's EDF.
Okay.
Maybe for nuclear.
Okay, the type of energy, I see what you're saying, yeah. The way for us to think about it is regulatory negligence, yeah? It's nothing that is justified. We can explain it by looking a little bit at historical details and the eagerness of certain countries to allow their market to be, liberalized or not. So France has been a situation where, EDF is still essentially a state company, and the French state overall is not particularly keen to see new entrants in the market. So they haven't made it very easy for new entrants to enter the market, and they haven't made it obligatory for this to happen. I mean, from my own very close experience with Greece, for example, Greece has been very much like that for a very long amount of time. So imagine Greece is like about 50%. Yeah, 50% belongs to the largest generator, which again is very large. What's going on? Even though Greece has liberalized its market with a law in 1993, I believe. 1993, if you imagine, that's like what? That's 30 years. And still, we're 50% with one dominant player. That's pretty mad. Why is it happening? Because the country, the state, the government is very closely linked with that dominant player. That dominant player in almost every case that you look at has in the past been a state-controlled company, a fully state-owned company. So when the liberalization process started, that company had 100% of the supply in every country here, or you see here, yeah, in every one of these countries, the state company or companies had all the assets, all the generation assets, all the cables. They had all the control of the electricity market. Gradually, after the liberalization process has started, what you would see is attempts of new entrants to get into the market and grab a market share. But that has not been very easy, because obviously for this to happen, sometimes it's a matter of market forces allowing it to happen. So for example, in a country that a lot of the energy assets, the energy generation assets were reaching the end of their lifespan, companies, state-controlled companies have been prevented from building new assets to allow only new entrants to get into the market. As an example, this has happened in a few markets. Or equally, they were allowed to, they were required, so state-controlled companies were required to sell a significant part of their assets. That was another thing that has happened in some countries. And that was to fast-track some competition in the market. It's not straightforward, it's a difficult thing, and there's energy carries a lot of emotion, often with politicians, with general public who feels that energy has to be their own and cannot be run by a foreign company, for example. So these are relatively contested issues. Not every country has been that keen to see their energy market changing rapidly. So that's why you see that picture, besides the case of very small countries where you could expect to have lack of competition. But for example, I would invite you to see the case of Malta as a counter example to Cyprus. So Cyprus and Malta are very small. They're both tiny, but Malta has a 40% market share for the dominant player. Cyprus has 100%. Why? Yeah, so it's an enormous difference for countries that have similar circumstances. So it's not just about the size of the market. It's a lot about the willingness of the governments to allow openness and allow new entrants to come in and so on. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All clear?
Yes.
Yes, clear.
All clear. You will be seeing a fair amount of that, and I want you to be vigilant about the countries you will be reviewing and trying to understand how much of two things actually are important there. One is, it's very typical for countries that that don't have a lot of competition, so that have very significant dominant players. It's very specific to these countries that they do not change their fuel mix very fast. Yeah, that's a typical problem. So one thing that you might want to comment on in your coursework might be, what are the barriers to entry in these new markets. So for example, if you're trying to develop, let's say, wind energy in your country, you might want to make a comment of why wind has not been developed adequately in the past in that country. Is it a purely competitive market, or is that a country that is, you know, super controlled by one state player that doesn't allow any new entrant to come in? These are important questions in terms of, for example, how much the cost would be. Yeah, if you have a fully open market and you welcome new entrants and you have all the right regulatory requirements to allow new market entrants to come in, chances are you will get the best possible prices. You will have lots of potential entrants coming in and offering to build, you know, new wind farms, so build their own power stations for very, you know, for the least possible cost. But if you're a state-controlled behemoth and you don't allow anybody to come in, chances are you're not going to achieve any price competition. So you might have higher costs of implementation. So such things, when you're trying to develop the size of your market, might be interesting aspects to comment on. Nothing to, you know, build necessarily, you know, pages and pages of analysis, but things to keep in mind when you try to open up the market of a specific country to competition and to new types of investment. So that's that about electricity, and we have a similar graph looking at gas. So what have we got here? Let's take a look. So that's market share of the largest production and import gas company, 2019. So here you see it's production and import because most European countries do not have their own capacity to produce gas. Yeah, so most countries are not gas producers; they're gas importers. So they bring gas from another country, which might be a producer itself, or it might be a transit country, for example, for gas. So let's see what's happening here. You have countries like Estonia, like Finland, Sweden, essentially have gas monopolies, yeah? And you have other countries which are very high again, like, you know, Poland, Luxembourg, but again, Luxembourg is a city really, Slovenia and so on. They again have very high reliance on single market players. And it goes on and on. I mean, there is variability there, but you have countries, you know, which have tiny gas markets, like, I don't know, like Ireland, for example, have a very high level of competition. So all sorts of setups are possible. I'd say gas tends to be easier to monopolize in that sense. Let me move you to the next slide. So that is transmission capacities that you have had, transmission movements for electricity that we had back in 2013. What is here for you to see very quickly? And again, that's a 2013 graph. It's not particularly up to date. These figures would be different. The only reason why I have it here is for you to take a look and see what kind of transactions have been happening across the continent in various parts, you know, of interconnectors. And I think it's always an interesting thing to look at, you know, because you see countries that play a lot, countries that interact a lot, and countries that don't. Yeah, as simple as that. You also see where the dominant flows might be, because I want you to look at, you know, the fact that every country connection has at least has two arrows. Yeah, you don't see just one arrow. So, for example, if I don't know, if you can see it well enough, I mean, I don't know if it's clear, the picture is clear to you. If you see here between France and the UK as a possible example, so France is exporting to the UK 15,000 gigawatt hours, and the UK is exporting to France only 14. So I want you to ask, I want you first of all to tell me, do you understand why you have both flows here? What's the case? You know, if Britain is such a prolific importer of electricity from France, why does it then export electricity to France? What happened there?
They are a big exporter, I think.
Yeah, but why does Britain export energy to France if it imports so much from France?
Because they produce a lot of energy through nuclear power, I think.
No, but the question is, why does
Maybe
Britain...
because it's closer.
Second?
Maybe because it's closer.
No, okay, the question, maybe my question is unclear. What I'm asking is, given that Britain imports so much energy from France, so you say it's 15,000 units, how come it still exports energy to France? You see there's a 14 here exported from the UK to France. So how come the UK ends up exporting energy to France if it is importing so much from France?
May it have something to do with exporting electricity generated by offshore wind farms, like in the night or something, when it's not needed in Britain?
Correct. So there's an element of that here. It's a question of timing. So there are certain times at which,
Or
even
maybe
though...
seasonal.
Sorry, again?
Could be also seasonal. Maybe during the winter they have more, and during summer less.
Exactly. There is a high degree of seasonality and timing that needs to be taken into account here. And that is that even though on average, in total through the year, the UK is by far a net importer of electricity from France, there are certain times of the year, very few obviously, at which the UK still has a surplus of energy that can sell to France. It can happen. Obviously, as you see from the numbers, it happens a lot less. It happens 1,000 times less than the opposite, than France exporting energy to Great Britain. But both ways of transmission are possible, and that's the case for every country. If you see, there are flows from both directions in pretty much all the countries around here. One of the things to see here again, and again, the numbers, like I said, are not accurate for now, but they're an important indication, a trajectory that you can take a look at. And is to see, for example, France is, broadly speaking, a very strong energy exporter. Yeah, so it exports a lot of energy to the UK. It exports a lot of energy, if you see here, to Germany, a lot of energy to Switzerland, a lot of energy to Italy. Yeah, so France is a major energy exporter. It exports much more energy than it imports. But there are also other, interesting relationships to see here. So, for example, Germany exports much more energy to Poland than it imports from Poland. Or equally, you can see, for example, that the Netherlands imports a lot of energy from Norway, and it exports a tiny amount of energy back to Norway. So there are interesting balances there that I always find quite fascinating to observe and understand, what has been happening. And of course, all of these transactions are very seasonally focused. Yes, some countries are stronger in certain seasons because of the type of energy that they have, because maybe they have huge hydro that produces a lot of energy in winter time, and maybe then they need to import a lot of energy in periods where there's a lot of nuclear capacity in another country and so on. So there is a lot of seasonality in these transactions. It doesn't show in this map because it's a whole year kind of map, but it's something that if you're interested in, I can show you more detailed data and more temporal data for every season or for every even every day of the year. So that's that with that issue. So I will drop this here and I'll say, how are we doing with time? Because I cannot see the clock here. Do you guys want to have a break before we continue?
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Yes.
So shall we say? I changed my screen here. So okay. Shall we say that we're gonna come back, say, in 20 minutes?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, okay.
Okay then. So I'll
Okay,
be looking forward to seeing you very soon then.
Hello. So we're back now to carry on with the second part of this class. So where we left things before was, I think I'm not sharing slides now. No, I'm not. So let me share my slides again. That's the one. Okay. So where we left things was really here, where I was showing you some of the transactions that are happening in the European energy market. That really, where I want to take us for the next step of this is what I promised you earlier on, that I think there's a number of resources out there, resources relevant to energy use and climate statistics and so on, which I think you'll find very useful both for your coursework, but also increasingly when you go out and you start working in the industry and you'll have to show your own leadership, your own initiative, your own expertise. There's no better way to demonstrate all that than your capacity to draw on original data and pull your own results through those data. So there are a few data sources available, which I want us to review a little bit, and through them we'll see where you can find what you need in each occasion. So maybe as a first question, let me ask, how many of you know of these databases, at least one of these databases that you see here? How many of you are familiar with these?
I actually didn't know it, but since I started researching for my paper, now I have some information on IRENA.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense, yeah. I just realized my camera has fallen down, sorry. Here's me. Okay, now you can see me too, in case you were missing me. Right, okay, so you came back out to IRENA. Anybody else has heard or done any work on statistics of other agencies?
Yeah, the Energy Information Administration for US data has a lot of.
Good. Somebody else? Any others that you had a chance to use before?
Yes, I use RESD a lot for my thesis, actually.
Okay. Yeah, I was about to ask, has nobody used Eurostat? What the hell? How is that possible? Okay. The reason for that is that Eurostat is not, it's not about energy. It's about everything that's going on in the EU. So whatever data you want to draw, chances are you will, somehow end up to Eurostat when you deal with a European case. Okay. However, from what I understand, most of you have never used any of these databases. So it's probably going to be a useful session that we run through them and see a little bit of what's available. Now, to do that, I have already started the web pages where I followed those links and I went to them. So I'll move us directly to those web pages now. So I think now I stopped sharing my slides, and what I'll do is I'll take us to here it is. So can you see my slides now, or do you see what do you see now? I still see my slides, but not the website I'm sharing? Okay.
Slides.
Okay, so let me see how I can fix that. So I'll take us from here, and then I'll say share the windows that I have here. That's the one. So now you can see the window that I'm sharing with the Energy Information Administration, right? So if I keep it here, you can see what I'm talking about. Is that true? Can you all see that?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, okay, that's good. And maybe I can try to show this to you in a slightly different way. So let me
show it to you like this. Can you see my face and the slides now?
Yes.
Does that work? Can you see the slides in a miniature window? Is this actually the case?
Yes.
Yeah, so maybe this is a bit stupid. Okay, let's move to something a little bit different. So what are the other, I'm trying to explore the options, guys. So that's another option. Oh, that's horrible. Okay, wait, is this better? Oh, that's super weird. Okay, this is the weird one. But I have the slides as a background. Yeah, maybe the original one was better. Let's keep it here. Okay, you don't need to see me. You need to see the website. That's what matters. So here is the American Energy Information Administration. That's part of the Department of Energy of the United States. It has so much information about energy. It's really crazy. It's one of the best energy resources anywhere in the world. Now, particularly if you have an interest in American data, so for any of the American states, that is by far the best resource you can find, and it's mostly free, so you can have a free ride really easily and find whatever data you like for American states. And the level of detail is really crazy. So that's a good resource for American data, but it's also a good resource for some non-American data. Let me show you what I mean. I should add that you're very welcome to follow this link, yeah, and visit the website by yourselves and explore and look around the data that they have. I think it's quite important because you can also get good ideas out of seeing data. It's a typical way where, for example, how we use in our own research. Quite often, data comes before research questions. So you develop your questions once you know what data you have available. So once you know if you can actually answer those questions. So what I want to show you here is, for example, if I go to geography here, and I can see this picture, and from here, I can pick what you have here as international energy statistics. So from here, I can open up to a new set of information. So that's besides the US states, for which, like I told you, there's so much detail and so incredibly good quality data. So if you exclude that for a while and you see for international energy statistics, that has also quite some interesting stuff. Let's click on this and see what we get. Does it work? Yes, here we are. Okay, so here you see the whole system is split between different types of resources, for example. So you can look at petroleum and other liquids, natural gas, coal and solids, coke and stuff, gas liquids, biofuels, electricity, total energy, other statistics, and so on. Yeah. One way to work on that, let's say, for example, you want to know about electricity. So here I am clicking on electricity, and then there's electricity capacity, generation, consumption, imports, exports, net imports, which is obviously the culmination of imports and exports, and more electricity data. So there are a few angles with which these data are pitched. Do you all understand what is the difference between electricity capacity and electricity generation? Are these terms, because we're going to be seeing these terms everywhere, so that's why I'm asking these questions now. Do you all feel quite confident in understanding what these are? Somebody has switched on their microphone by mistake. So do you all understand what we mean when we see these data? So when you see capacity and when you see generation, what is the difference between those two? Do you understand? Let me switch on my light. It's quite dark here. Ta-da! Nobody. Okay. So when we talk about capacity, that identifies the amount of energy installations that we have in a country. That is a bit different than, say, for example, the amount of energy these installations produce. So you could have, for example, let's say a nuclear power station, which is a very large power station, so has a big capacity, that the capacity it has to produce electricity if we wanted to produce electricity. But then it's a different thing how much electricity it actually generates. So if it's used a lot and it's switched on all the time and it carries on producing, then it will give you a lot of generation. That's a generation. But it could as well be, switched off a lot of the time because it's a faulty power station and needs a lot of maintenance, or it has certain restrictions in its operation and so on. So then it would produce less energy. So even though it has large capacity, so the capacity that you have, the cumulative capacity you have in a country might be large, in reality, the generation might not be that large. So that is the difference there. And it's even more pronounced, I would say, with other types of power stations, like, for example, wind energy. So you could have a lot of wind energy capacity, and you could possibly see that capacity producing a lot or not so much energy, depending on the wind potential of the sites that you have that, those wind farms at. Even more striking can be the issue of hydro. So hydro capacity might be, specific in a given country, and then the generation, even when the capacity does not change, could be changing quite drastically from year to year. Why that could be the case?
Depending on water levels, right?
Correct. So it depends on precipitation. So if it has been a rainy year, it's very likely you will have a lot of hydropower production. If it's been a very dry year, maybe you'll have, pretty much zero, nothing. So that varies a lot. Even if you don't change at all the capacity of that power station. The power station has been designed to be of a certain capacity. The actual output that generates depends on the rainfall. So that is, some of the ways to think about the difference between generating capacity and generating an actual energy generation that has been happening through a certain period of time. Let me get us back to that then. So let me go on the generation aspect, yeah? So I'm clicking on this, and let's see what we get. So it keeps loading. Here we are. And what have we got here? So first thing is, you can see a breakdown of what we talk about, say generation, yeah? So one thing is a number of types of generation. The other is to understand, so the other is years, so what has been happening per year. And here you're seeing data for the world, yeah? So that's as vague as it sounds. If I scroll down here, so I'll carry on going down here, and you'll see that then it starts going by country. So if I go up, let me show you again that thing. That's world level data. And then it has a certain number of indicators. So total generation, nuclear generation, fossil fuel generation, renewables, hydro, and out of renewables, it has a breakdown on hydroelectricity and non-hydroelectricity and geothermal and solar, tide, wave, fuel energy, tide and wave, again, breakdown, and solar breakdown, and wind, again, another category, biomass and waste, another category, and hydroelectric pump storage that we have discussed about before. So these are, the breakdown of activities that you have in this domain, and then by country and region, as you see, the same set of indicators begins for every country alphabetically. So you see here, there's a lot of scrolling to do here. And what we see then is every country alphabetically starts going. Afghanistan is the first, and then you go on to Albania, and then you go on to Algeria, and then, I don't know, American Samoa, and so on, yeah? So there is every country there that you can scroll and see what have they been doing in terms of energy. And there is a time coverage that, if you see here, it leads to 2020. And of course, data is not available for every country for 2020. For most countries, we don't probably have it. And if you go back, that data goes all the way to 1980. Yeah, so there's a good trajectory of data there. Whenever you see values like 0 there, it doesn't always mean it's 0. It could be as well that they didn't have exactly, good quality data or anything like that. So kind of depends. I mean, be skeptical sometimes when there are gaps in the data sets here. If I were to stop this at the energy source and activity, because now it's based on country region, I could take this to energy source. So here again, you can see that what has happened is it gives me the ranking is different. So now it takes me to the specific energy parameters, and then it goes down and listing every possible country for that parameter. Yeah, so then I have to, if I scroll throughout and I see all the countries, then I go to the next energy parameter, it's going to be nuclear energy, and so on. Yeah, again, I see then all the countries for nuclear energy. And if I carry on scrolling and I reach the end, then the next thing is going to be fossil fuel energy, I think. Yeah, fossil fuel energy and so on. Yeah. So does that make sense as a type of presentation to you? Do you understand what you're seeing?
Yes.
Yeah. Are you clear? So another thing I'm doing here to make things a little bit more complex, but I think also more interesting, is you can click here. It says data options. So I'm clicking here, and it gives me a large number of options. So what do I have in these options is, first of all, I can select the number of countries I care about. So as a matter of fact, I might not really care about the whole world and every country in it. I might care only about one country. Let's say that you want to find out things about your coursework. And let's assume your coursework is on, let's say, which country is my favorite? Which country is my favorite that still has something going on with energy? Because that's a tricky one. Come on, I'm going to take you to my home. I think nobody has selected Greece for your coursework. Is it true? No, somebody has. Rafael did. Okay. Rafael, who is Greek, has selected Greek. I think that's what's happening. So maybe I shouldn't talk to you about Greece. I should talk to you about a country that we don't have here. Let's see. You all have Italy. You all have we have Ireland, Greece. If I go to Sweden, is Sweden taken? No, Sweden is not taken. Let me show you a little bit about Sweden then. So I'll go here. So let me find Sweden here. Where's Sweden? Down here. So here's Sweden. So I'm going to click on Sweden only. So we have just one country now, nothing else. And in terms of activity, you see, we're still stuck on electricity, but you could pick something else, yeah? It's just electricity that we have selected in the beginning. And you see here it has the whole range of options that you saw before, plus some more that we didn't necessarily see before. So I'm going to click on all of them to get the full picture for electricity in Sweden and distribution losses as well. So then we'll go to units, and that's just the energy units you can pick. I'll go for metric, and then we have the time frequency for which you can see for a country like Sweden, it doesn't let you have data quarterly or monthly. It's only annual data. For most of the international statistics, the provision is for annual data. For the American statistics, American states, sometimes you can get higher frequency, on a quarterly basis or on a monthly basis, depending on the territory. And let's say you don't really care so much about historic data of 1980. That's really ancient. Most of you were not born at that time. I was just about born at that time, so it's really too old. So let's pick that up and say, let's see data from the year 2000 to the latest data that it has, 2020. View data. Let's see what we get with that. It'll be a much more compact view of data now. So what we have here is all the energy parameters that we talked about before. And again, of course, you see the years that you have. Again, 20 years is a good timeline for your data, and you have total generation and nuclear energy and fossil fuels and renewables and so on. And you can see that the trajectory of these data moving forward, yeah, for every single year. So that's the nature of that stuff here. You could even, in theory, produce some visualizations of those data here. So that's not totally impossible. Have never used that tool with visualization, but I'm not that sure if it's a good one or if it's a bit rubbish. I have to be honest with you. I think it's probably rubbish. So don't use visualizations here. What you should try to do instead is go to use directly your data. For example, if you wanted to show how much energy production has been changing in, I don't know, in Sweden for the last 20 years, the total electricity generation, for example, you would have to, take these data, transfer them in Excel. I think there is a way to download data. Yeah, download options here. So you could download a CSV file through a table, and then that table opens directly from Excel, and you can take the data in Excel and put together your own graphs. Does that? I mean, do you all feel comfortable with these kind of things? Taking a table from here, moving into Excel, and in Excel, marking your own columns and making your own graphs. Do you feel okay with all that?
One comment, Professor, is that if you download it as a CSV and then put it into Excel, it'll save as CSV, which will only save the first sheet of the workbook. So make sure for those students using Excel to save it as an Excel file if you're downloading from Salesforce, or else it'll only save the first sheet. You'll lose all the other sheets.
Correct. Whenever you have the possibility, of course, that's better. Yeah. But don't worry too much about that. I mean, often if you have like a single table like this, then it is quite straightforward. If you have many different tables, it becomes more complicated, I agree. So yeah, other than that, are you all relatively comfortable with what you've seen at this point? Yeah. And I mean, clearly here, I showed you Sweden, and maybe that was not the best example, because I think most of you that work on European countries will not be using this database. We'll be using the Eurostat database. But it's still a good example to see what is doable. The beauty of the Energy Information Administration, apart from the data it has for the American states, is the amount of data it will give you for countries which are neither part of the USA nor part of the European Union. And these are the countries for which data usually suffers. So, for example, if I were to just pick a wild choice here and show you some data on, let's say, for example, on Namibia, yeah, a country for normally very underrepresented in energy statistics worldwide. So let's see what we get for Namibia. View data. And again, you would expect that for some countries like Namibia, maybe data is not super available, it's not every detail of it that is there, but you can still get a bit of that information, yeah? So obviously, Namibia, as you would expect, has no nuclear power stations, it has some fossil generation that you cannot really see very well here. It has some renewables, out of which pretty much almost all of it is hydroelectricity, and tiny bits and pieces of other types of energy. So you can start getting a feel of what is happening in these countries, in countries which are not represented in the major databases. And that's, I would say, probably the best use of the Energy Information Administration, apart from those of you that will be dealing with American states. So that's that. Let me continue with something else now, if you're all happy with me to do so. Do you want to see anything else from the Energy Information Administration, or are you happy to do it at your leisure time? Because of course that's what you do in your leisure time, right? I mean, you check websites with data, what else? So that's with that. I'm not seeing any voices of staying here, so I'll move to IRENA next. Now, IRENA is the International Renewable Energy Agency. It's something which it's not particularly old, like the other databases are all much older than IRENA. IRENA is a much newer thing. It has come to existence much more recently, but it has quite a good coverage, lots of member states in it, and quite good statistics and good report analysis, country-based intelligence that you can tap into. one of the things that I've always found, quite nice in IRENA is the policy analysis that it has. Let me try to see where that is. They have these tiny, tiny, tiny letters here. I'm sorry for that. Let me see if I can zoom this a little bit. Yeah, maybe now you can see these letters a little bit bigger. So it would be in terms of publications here and statistics. Let me see, because some of that, I want to make sure that I show you things that you will have access to rather than things that are behind paywalls. So first thing would be to show you what they do in terms of country profiles. So I click on this, and here you see again a number of countries that are available, and I will click. Say, for example, like I said, some of the countries which I think are underrepresented in international energy statistics overall. Let's click on Ethiopia, for example, for the sake of it now. And you see a very quick fact sheet with what's happening in Ethiopia. And what, of course, you can see here is that this data is not the most up-to-date stuff you can possibly find somewhere else. So it's 2017, yeah? So that's not as recent as it could have been. An important thing to highlight here is that, and I think it's something that many of you will get trapped in, is that normally energy statistics always lag for 1 to 2, sometimes even 3 years. So in 2021 now, it's very rare that you would be seeing data for 2020. In some countries, some databases, maybe you will find something, but it's more often the case you will be finding data for 2019 or even 2018 for some countries. So don't be surprised if that's the case. But again, don't settle for data which is from 2015, yeah, because that would be too old. You can do better than that. So that's just a little, comment to make. And here you have just a normal, spec sheet, with a few facts and figures about energy in Ethiopia. It's nothing explicit, it's nothing detailed, but you can see a little bit of what's happening in that country. Let me close that one and go back here to the, kind of country profiles and see a little bit more on what these guys produce. So if you wanted, something more detailed, for example, this is a report about Paraguay, and you can find such reports, for many different countries, quite clearly. So you can see this one, for example, the one about Paraguay, that was the first one that showed up. You can download here. It's freely available. Yeah? It's 72 pages in Paraguay. If you want to find everything about Paraguay and you were too shy to ask, here's your report. And there are such reports for pretty much, every country on Earth. Some of them are more new than others, but again, it's a very useful resource to understand, the state of play, what is happening in some countries around the world. Again, another useful contribution from IRENA. There is more into IRENA, and that's what I'm trying to look at for right now. Sorry, that's the policy stuff, which I always find very exciting with IRENA. So one thing to look at here is, for example, you can look at deployment policies. So policies that allow further deployment of renewable energy. Let me click on that, yeah? Actually, the previous page was something which I want to show you, the PAM database. Here it is. Oh, they have removed it from here. Okay, that's a bit unfortunate. And it moved us to here. That's interesting. Okay, so it has gone behind a paywall, I'm afraid. That bit we're not going to see. So in terms of other things that you have here, so there are various initiatives that are featured here. But going back to renewables, where I want us to stick a little bit for, there are things here which are very useful and analytical tools. So say, for example, you want to know a little bit about costs for renewable energy. You can click here, and you can see, for example, power generation costs. There's a number of options from this point onwards. Yeah. let me take you, for example, to, let's stick to generation. There's also energy storage and other things that you might find useful. So let's see, for example, wind power. Wind power costs that you can see here. In a very instant way, you can read this one and see what kind of energy costs you get. And I mean, again, that's not necessarily the most accurate resource, but you can get a feel of what kind of costs are involved with wind power at a global scale. Yeah, it's just in a couple of paragraphs, that's it. It's a very small piece of information, but something that I would say, you know, you want to have at your disposal. You want to be able to access that rapidly and have a feel of, you know, what does it mean? What is going on in this domain? For example, for solar, it's exactly the same. Yeah, you can see a couple of figures here. Something can give you a little bit of information that you need to take in 10 minutes time and understand what's happening. There's a lot more detail on that. Like I said, you know, when you go to energy storage, you will be seeing, you know, whole reports and so on. Depending on whether these reports are free, for example, here, renewable power generation cost in 2020, very recent, you can download that, again, for free, it's freely available. It's quite a large report, so you see it takes a bit of time here on my computer to download. And you can see for a range of facilities, for a range of activities, for a range of regions, what kind of energy costs are to be expected in the renewable energy generation side of things. So again, it's quite a large report, 180 pages, but you will look at the, you know, at the details of it at the main index and see what is available. So for example, if I were to look specifically for offshore winds, and I want you to go at page 90 here, you will see that there's a very significant level of detail, much more than what you saw before that was just, you know, 3 paragraphs. There's a lot of depth in these statistics that you see there. So if you want more, there's always more, yeah? So you see here, there's a whole analysis, you know, several pages of analysis for the kind of costs that you have in these areas and how these have unfolded and how these have developed and all of that. We could be talking about these literally for days. There's no shortage of interesting stuff going on into these reports, but my main interest right now is not to exhaust all of these sources of information, but is rather to show you that they do exist. So I want you to know that they do exist, and I want you to be capable of searching them for yourselves and being able to pull out something that you need when you need it. You might not need it immediately. You might need it much after, years later, after you finish this master's program. But it's good that you know where to source that information from. So I'll drop this graph as well, this report as well. Let me see if the statistics section remains accessible, because it has been on and off. So if I go, for example, to energy balances, so there are, yeah, it's a bit clunky, but you can do some interesting things here. So you can select certain countries and go by technology and assume certain types of, you know, consumption and so on, and all of that is exportable afterwards to Excel. Again, it's yet another type of resource that you can get data from, and the same goes, you know, with costs and so on. So I'll leave this again for you to play in your spare time. Are you all quite clear with what Irina does, more or less? Do you feel that, you know, it makes sense to you and it's something you can keep developing your knowledge on if you have time? Yeah, all good. So I'm not hearing lots of voices, so you're either all playing with Irina or have left the call and went for dinner, or who knows. So I'll take Irina down and I'll take you next to, where is it? Here it is. Eurostat. So with Eurostat, so this is the main page you will hit once you open Eurostat. Yes, you click on Eurostat, that's the home page. And then from the home page, you click on data, and that should take you to something like this. So when it comes to Eurostat data, there's an immense amount of data sets. Like I told you earlier, this is not a dedicated source for energy. It's rather a dedicated source for European data. So they have all sorts of European level statistics. You can see some headings here, like, general and regional statistics, economy and finance, population and social conditions, industry, trade and services, agriculture, forestry and fisheries, so resources kind of stuff, international trade in goods, transport, environment and energy, science, technology and digital society. So clearly, for us, we might be looking more closely in things like environment and energy. Sometimes we care about things like, the transport stuff, but not necessarily. Sometimes we care about resources, so kind of natural resources sort of things. Sometimes we care about population and social conditions, so understanding a little bit what's happening at the population side and, wealth and how these things might impact or might correlate with energy or environmental parameters. We also sometimes like economy and finance sort of data, and then we take those and we correlate them with energy. So we see, for example, things like how much energy does a country need to use to produce a dollar of value, or things like that. Yes, there are intensity indices, composite indices that we can produce if we have access to more data sets, more timelines like these. So let's go back to energy and environment area here. So I'll show you first energy, because really I think that's the core of the stuff you might want to see. And then I'll show you a little bit, if we have time, some of the stats in the science, technology, and digital society. I think both are quite interesting. So energy, let me focus on energy. Click here, it opens up, new parts, new subfolders as you go on. So energy statistics, quantities, let's see that first. As you see, it keeps opening, as I keep clicking, it keeps giving me more options. So energy statistics, quantities, annual data. So it could be annual data or monthly data, or it can even be short-term monthly data or monthly historical data. So some of that that's the level of accuracy that you get here. Some of them are estimates, some of them are confirmed data. What you normally do here, for most of the work you will have to do, is looking at the annual data. Yeah, most of us will work with those. So I click on that, and then I get another number of subfolders. As you see, it keeps opening. So from here, I often use, the energy balances, or supply and transformation and consumption, or some energy indicators if I want something more composite to come back. Let me show you a little bit the energy balances. I think that might be one you might be interested in. So here, an area which you might find interesting is production of electricity, for example, and derived heat by type of fuel. So here what I'll do is I'll open the data browser for that, yeah. So it will take us to a new page. I'll accept the cookies, because what else I can do? And don't ask me again. Okay, so here we are. So Eurostat is not a joke. It has a very serious amount of data, and it can be overwhelming. When it comes to energy data, you can very easily lose it completely here, because there are so many parameters that go on that it can be overwhelming. So what I'll try to do here is to take you a little bit to the types of data streams that are available. So bear with me as we do that. So let's see what is this new format that they have here. So if I click here, so I don't know if you all saw what I did. I clicked, like, there are these options here, what type of energy balance you want. And it has, gross electricity production being one of the 10 possible options. So I'm just clicking here to see more options. And I see those options here. So, if I click here, it gives me gross electricity production, which is the one that is ticked and the one that we see, or I could choose to go for specific aspects of gross electricity production. Now, what I want you to know once we enter this place is that that is quite a deep dive on energy accounting. And energy accounting is nothing that you will learn overnight or even in the course of this module. It's, in my opinion, it's a whole degree course if you want to do it. It's proper accounting. It has hundreds of classifications of energy types. It has hundreds of classifications of environmental parameters and what they mean. There are maybe about thousands of classifications that need your knowledge in order to be able to match data from different data sets. So it's quite a big area. I've been dealing with such data for maybe about 20 years now, from a number of databases, some private, some public. I can tell you that I'm still struggling sometimes. So if you see too much stuff here and you start thinking, what the hell is that? What am I doing here? And I don't understand it, don't panic. That's probably normal. A couple of the things to let you know here. I mean, gross electricity production is the generic form of energy production that you will see, of electricity production you see here. There are some subdivisions of that. So for example, you see below, gross electricity production, which is only main activity producer electricity only. What they mean with these things is that, there are different classifications in the industry. So for example, you have electricity producers who have electricity production as their main work. That's their main job. But you have other producers that are what we call auto producers. These guys are usually large factories, for example, aluminum production factories or steel production factories or glass factories, some of the most energy intensive industries. These producers typically produce electricity themselves, which then they use it within their own manufacturing processes. Yes, so within this data, we include these guys as well. So if you wanted to only know what auto producers do, so what only those factories that produce energy for themselves do, you would click here instead of the gross electricity production. Or if you wanted to know what auto producers that produce heat and power do, you would click on this one. And so on and so forth. Some factories, for example, so power stations produce mostly heat. So you can see the heat statistics equally. And again, it's main activity or auto producer combined heat and power, auto producer heat only, and so on. Yeah. Let me take us back here to gross energy production. It keeps getting more and more complicated. I'll show you a couple of these things here, but really it's not to confuse you. It's just to show you that a lot of complexity exists, and I don't want you to panic with it. I want you to be cool with it. If you are unaware of something, if you're wondering what it is, for most of these terms, there are good glossary sections. If you were to Google, some of these definitions, you will probably find quite fast what they are. Or you can email me if you're wondering and you have no idea what to do with them. I'll probably be able to help. So the second part here is looking at geopolitical entities, so the countries or regions or whatever. And you see here there are 43 options. So it's not just the European Union countries. There are also groups of those countries. You see it's 28 member states, as was the case before Britain moved out of the Union, or 27 from 2020 onwards. And then there are the individual countries below that. And I'm going to scroll through that quite fast. And then after you're out of the European Union countries, you also have countries which are part of the European arrangement. So for example, you have Iceland. It's not a member, but it is part of the area. You have Norway similarly, have the United Kingdom, which although it has left, we still love each other and all of that. Have the Montenegro, countries which are already in various stages of their accession to the European Union. Albania, Serbia, Turkey, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Moldova, and so on. There are other neighboring countries like Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova. So there is a significant number of countries around the European Union which are part of these statistics. Then more complicated than that, because countries I'm sure is the easiest one. More complicated than that is when we go to energy product classification. So it's this one here. I'll click on that. And this is when things become a little bit more complicated. So here you have what we call energy products. I remind you that the balance you're looking at here is gross electricity production. So if you were to combine this with the product classifications, you might be able to see how much of these fuels, so here there are fuels essentially, raw materials, raw fuels, how much of these fuels are used in gross electricity production. So let me scroll through some of these for your benefit, just to see a little bit what they are. So you have things like, you know, a generic term of solid fossil fuels. Yeah, so these are all the types of fuels which are like coal, and there's a ton of them. Let me see with you what types of coal we have here. So you have things like anthracite, a very high carbon level coal. You have coking coal, which is the second in ranking order. You have other bituminous coal or sub-bituminous coal or lignite. So this is kind of a pecking order depending on the carbon or the carbon content of various types of coal. So anthracite is the one with the highest content of coal, is the top quality coal, let's say. And you go all the way down, coking coal, bituminous, and sub-bituminous coal, and lignite. Lignite is the worst quality you have. And then from that on forwards, you have, you know, other types of solid fuels, again, the coke, oven coke. So these are cokes that are produced in furnaces. You have gas coke, again, various byproducts of furnace production. Brown coal briquettes, again, these are semi-burned types of coal. Tars, manufactured gases. So here you're moving into the gas categories. And you have a large number of them as well. Some of them are you know, more kind of natural gas. Some other are types of byproducts of coal processing, and so on. You have peat and oil products from here onwards, and natural gas, crude oil, and so on. You see a large variety of crude oil varieties. So you have liquids and refinery feedstocks and other hydropower, other hydrocarbons, and refinery gases. I'll move fast through those. Like, you know, there are so many of them that I really don't want you to freak out with them. It's quite easy to get lost in this mess. And you can see also, let me move here. There are also renewable energy sources here. Yeah? So, for example, if you wanted to find out how much electricity is being produced by hydro, let's select one country only. I'll uncheck them all, and I will pick, for example, only, let's find one country that is of interest in this domain. Let's take Italy. And then we will go and see what we get here. So I'll then go for time. So time here, it gives us, we have marked 2019 and the last 10 years behind that. And we'll have time frequency, which is annual. And we'll have unit of measurement, which is kilotoe here, but I think that's a bit stupid. So let's go for gigawatt hours instead, which is a much more standard unit for electricity. And let's see what we get with that. So that updates right now, and you'll see a new table emerging after that. It takes a bit of time, but we'll get there, don't worry. It seems to be struggling, and it shouldn't. It's quite easy normally. I'm quite surprised with how long this takes. Wow. Normally, it's not that slow. I don't know what's up now. Everybody's using Eurostat. Who knows? All the economics students from Bologna and Rimini are looking at Eurostat, and we took the server down. So you see here, there's a timeline, yeah, that shows you pretty much the hydropower production. Remember that that's what we've chosen for Italy. So these are the figures that you will get for all that period. So there's nothing crazy here. You can even produce a line for this. So that's what this looks like. Yeah, it's a relatively stable stable picture. There's nothing too crazy out of this. Hydro production in Italy has not been changing dramatically over the last year. That's the message. If you wanted to change that, I can go back to my table. And ideally, really, I should open up here to see that more detailed area. And I can pick, for example, I can see it with a little bit more detail. Maybe I shouldn't say hydro. Maybe I should see what's happening with wind energy. So let's take wind energy for that. I'm wondering if that's the only one that is ticked. Okay, hydro is still ticked. So I remove hydro. And let's see what we get for that. I hope it's going to be a bit faster this time, because this takes ridiculously long. Does anybody else use this right now? Is it faster with your computers, or is it just me? Because it's the slowest I've ever seen it. Nobody else is using it? Yeah, okay. Let me produce a line from this data. So this is wind electricity production, yeah, in Italy. Let's see what we get. So this has been changing over the last decade. You can see that has been going increasingly up as a result of, obviously more wind energy installations in the country. So as you can imagine, there's, a crazy number of combinations you can have here, which can help you produce graphs and help you produce data tables that you can then use in whatever ways you want for your coursework. But I would like to think for activities way beyond your coursework. So can I ask you, do you all feel comfortable with what you see as a toy that you can play with and find whatever you need to find?
Yes,
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult for me to show you
personally do.
Everything, but I think it's a good demonstration of the capabilities that these databases have for you. So maybe then I'll leave Eurostat if you're all happy with it and keep exploring by yourselves, and I'll take you to the International Energy Agency. So here you are with that. So International Energy Agency, let me click on this. So this is the database and the kind of the energy strand of the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. And they have quite a good database. If I'm to be honest, probably their database is one of the best international databases you can find for data. But there's a problem. It's behind the paywall. So that's why I'm leaving it for last, because I know that many of you will not have a decent access on it. However, because they're very authoritative and they have lots of interesting analysis and lots of interesting statistics and lots of interesting reports, I want you to know of it. I want you to know of International Energy Agency. So even though you might not be able to access all of their data, I think it's important to have in mind that they exist and they publish very good quality reports, very authoritative reports. They do get things wrong, but every forecaster, every statistician has that. So don't be put off about that or any criticism there. They're still a very authoritative source. So, for example, they have technologies that are moving towards, decarbonization and so on. And I think we probably want to have these in mind. So some of you, for example, might be looking in some aspects of these things. And also in terms of data, like, for example, if I click here and try to see what they have in terms of data, let's go on data tools. And again, here you can see that there are some options to pick up parts of the data you might want here. Like I said, I don't think it's the easiest source to use with data, But I'd like to hope that, you know, some glimpse of what you might need or what might be available in other sources eventually, you might get from these guys. Some of the general statistics, especially because you can produce them so rapidly through here. This is the main reason why I like that. So, say renewable by source, and that's again world statistics here. It's nothing else. So if I say instead I want to say, for example, France, yeah, you can see a graph for France. Yeah, it's quite straightforward. And you can, of course, download that data. You can produce your own graphs from that. So it's not as comprehensive as other databases that are out there that allow you to play a lot more in a more level of detail with data. But still, in terms of accessibility, I think they're quite good. So with that in mind, and knowing that I probably have fried your brains now with all of this of these sources, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll take us back here. So do you all feel that, you know, there was something useful for you here in this data set, especially that from my understanding, many of you didn't have a lot of experience with using energy statistics before. So do you feel that there is a little bit clearer now? That things are a bit clearer in terms of where you can source your data from your for your coursework, but also beyond your coursework? I mean, does that look a little bit better now for you? Even if a bit chaotic.
Yes, it is comfortable.
Yeah, so I'm sure that gradually, you know, once you spend a bit more time in these data sets, you will become more competent in analyzing them, in understanding what is what and all of that. But by all means, you know, always your first port of call must be Google. If you see any terms which are not clear at all, look at glossaries around in Google. They're very good resources for that. If that still doesn't explain it, you know, feel free to drop me an email or ask me in the next class or whatever you like. Yeah. So with that in mind, and knowing that probably you're exhausted after this day, I'll let you go, and I'll be looking forward to talking to you again next Monday. But in the meanwhile, make sure you have a good time and you start looking at your coursework, please. Okay, so that's it. Bye-bye from me now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Prof.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.